This term at the University of Waterloo, I'm teaching my introductory course to Buddhism, as I do. So I'm teaching my introductory course on Buddhism, and something I like to do is assign short exercises to my students. The idea is that these exercises, these are experiential exercises, and they give students a taste of what Buddhism is actually like. So it's not just me at the podium, just like showing slides and talking about Buddhism, but get them to actually do something, because really you can only understand something from the inside, ultimately. So I want them to get just a little taste of this sort of thing. It's to go beyond the books and lectures and all this sort of thing. So some of the exercises that I've designed are developed in order to teach them a little bit about cultivating loving kindness towards other people. Or another one, it has them envisioning all the interconnections of some particular object that they choose, and what goes into its sort of manufacturing, what needs to exist, what relationships exists in. Another exercise we do is practicing mindful eating. So we do a bunch of these different exercises in my class. And the most recent exercise, which I was just marking yesterday, passing most students on that exercise, I asked them to follow the 5 basic Buddhist precepts. These are basic Buddhist sort of moral precepts. Do this for one day. I say just one day, that's all, as an exercise. So they've all been through the class. I wonder, if I quiz us, would we be able to come up with all 5 basic Buddhist moral precepts? These are not a requirement in Jodo Shinshu, but they are commonly shared across most forms of Buddhism. So maybe we know, or maybe we can guess. Yeah, you didn't know you're going to have a quiz this morning. This is the problem when the minister is a professor. You're always in danger. Pop quiz. Okay, so let's see. Okay, all right. Who knows or can take a guess as to what any of the 5 basic moral precepts are for lay people in Buddhism? Any guesses? Ray, go for it.
Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie.
You're on a roll. You're doing great.
Something to do with sex.
Something to do with sex. Yes. Great. That's how it's phrased by the Buddha. Yep. Yes. Okay. Whoa. Okay. All right. You get an A. That's excellent. Okay. That's right. Okay. So you got them right. That's good. Okay. Yeah. So number 4 is no sexual misconduct, which is defined variously according to different traditions, and not indulging, or in some cases not overindulging in intoxicants, depending on the interpretation of the 5th one. So very good. Okay. All right. So these are, here's an excerpt from the actual instructions I gave to my students here. I pulled this text out here, so I've got it for myself. So, and what I do is I record these almost like podcast style, and they can listen to them while walking around. I try to encourage them to go outside, get some fresh air, some exercise. So otherwise they don't, especially in the winter term. And so here's what I say. So I say, on your chosen day, because they get to choose which day in the term they're going to do this exercise, try to avoid the following 5 things. As much as possible, don't kill anything at all. Obviously, that includes people. That's part of my text. Yep. But also try to avoid killing bugs, such as mosquitoes, ants, cockroaches, spiders, and so on. Second, as much as possible, don't steal anything or borrow anything without the owner's explicit permission. So this is not taking, in other words, right? Obviously, that includes not robbing any banks, but also try to avoid eating anything out of the fridge unless you're certain it doesn't belong to your housemates. Let me tell you, they broke this rule almost all. Okay, that one right there was hard for them. Third, as much as possible, don't misuse sex. Obviously, that includes harassment or assault, but also try to avoid late night booty calls outside of a committed relationship. So this is probably the first Dharma talk in history that included that phrase, late night booty calls. Anyways, we'll just move on. Fourth, as much as possible, try to avoid lying. Obviously, this includes straight up deceptions, but also try to avoid white lies, half-truths, strategic omissions, and any other less than fully truthful speech. Fifth, as much as possible, try to avoid the use of intoxicants. Obviously, that includes not getting hammered while doing your homework, but also try to avoid cannabis, caffeine, or any other sort of recreational stimulant or relaxant. So this was their assignment. Or, it's a little longer than that, but this is an excerpt out of that assignment. So afterwards, they're asked to write a short reflection paper after trying this out for one day. And the goal of this assignment is for the students to learn. I have to say, I myself have learned a lot from their experiences in marking these papers and talking to them about them over the years that I've been doing this assignment with them. So back to the audience participation part. What do you think was the precept that was hardest for my university students to keep for one day? Which one do you think? You got a 20% chance of being right, but there's nothing, you don't get anything wrong if you don't get it right. Yeah, go for it. Lying. Okay. And what do you think would be hardest about it?
The white lies.
The white lies.
Not impossible. It's difficult to go into social relationships, right? With being truthful.
Excellent. Okay. And for people online who may not have been able to hear, the suggestion was that maybe it would be lying was the hardest one because social relationships make it really difficult not to go through the day committing little white lies and other stuff just to kind of it's just how it is. Yeah. Okay. Very excellent guess. Any other guesses? Yeah, go for it. Intoxicants? Which one? Caffeine? Yeah, no coffee. Very excellent guess as well. Okay. Is that where you were going? Yeah. Okay. Oh, you guys are really good. Okay. All right. So indeed, many find it hard to avoid caffeine. This is very hard for them. And according to their answers, there was a lot of agonizing over whether to drink coffee or not drink coffee. A lot of agonizing, frankly, for these students. Yeah. They are super dependent and way more dependent than they realized before they did this sort of thing, right? It's not always just coffee, but definitely coffee is what I heard the most. There was another student who was struggling not to drink half a dozen Red Bulls in one day. So I was like, okay, buddy, maybe you need to do a little self-reflection on that one too. Yeah, so absolutely, this is a difficult one that many of them brought up. Others became much more aware of how much they're borrowing or taking without permission. This was brought up a lot, especially they didn't seem to realize just how much they were taking other people's food was really common. So this happened in every situation, but especially for students living in dorms, together, they were absolutely in each other's business and getting all the stuff. And, this was something that came up. Or if they were living at home, often they were taking their sister's clothes without asking out of the closet and all this sort of stuff and everything. So, there was a lot of discovery for them around that. I had 2 different students this year whose dorms were full of bugs. And so they tried really hard not to squish them all day long, but they both found it pretty hard. In fact, at one point, an ant crawled on her hand. She just reflexively, and smacked it. And then she's like, oh no. She went looking for it everywhere to find out whether she had violated this or not. She didn't find it. She didn't know. She doesn't know the fate of that one particular ant. Did it just land somewhere and crawl away? Or, did it go to the Pure Land? We don't know. So anyways, I had one student who smokes weed every day and found that temptation very strong and eventually gave in. But actually, this process opened her eyes about how reliant on cannabis she had become, actually. So she kind of reflected and realized she was using it sort of as a crutch to smooth over times when she felt bored or frustrated or anxious, things that we all feel, but certainly university students feel it all the time. And there was another student who'd been struggling earlier in the year with addiction to cannabis, and then she felt proud that she managed not to use it all day long during the entirety of the exercise. So they're kind of discovering things about themselves, learning things about themselves through this sort of process here. I have to say, while there were plenty of violations of precepts against stealing or not taking without permission, and against taking intoxicants, overwhelmingly, the precept that my students found the hardest to follow was not lying. Yeah, you put your finger right on it, right from the beginning. That surprised me the first time that I ran the exercise. I didn't know it was going to be that way. And it surprises the students regularly too, when they do this and they discover this sort of thing. They discover to their chagrin that they basically lie all day long throughout every day. Yeah. There's an old Buddhist saying actually that we should practice as if our hair is on fire. So this is sort of a saying that, oh, your human birth is very precious and rare, and you should urgently use it to develop insight and awaken, and don't just waste it. So practice like your hair is on fire. Based on what I heard from my students, apparently we should be practicing like our pants are on fire too, because they and all of us are apparently lying all day long. So why was this the hardest one to keep? Well, for most of the students, it was indeed, they found that they're telling these white lies all day long. You're exactly right. This is what they're really surprised by. They're doing it all the time to ease various social situations. Yeah. So often this was to make other people feel better. So this was interesting because then for the students who noticed this, they were reflecting on how there's actually an interesting conflict between two different Buddhist values there, between Buddhist morality and telling the truth and being sort of upright in that way, and Buddhist compassion and not hurting other people's feelings or harming them in some way. That these two actually came into conflict at moments during their everyday lives. So that was an interesting sort of thing for them to discover and have to kind of think their way through. For example, there was a student who said that she lied to her parents about not feeling sick. In fact, she had COVID. So she didn't want them to worry about her though. So she said, no, she was fine. She's away at school and she just didn't tell them. She recovered and was okay. But, she hadn't told the truth to them. And so they didn't know what was going on with her during this time period. There were many sort of similar examples of like, there was a friend who said that she couldn't go and study with some people because she already had plans, but really she just didn't want to go study with those folks at that time. But she felt this was a nicer way to let her friends down, was saying that she was already booked, essentially. In many other cases, students were sort of deceptive because they didn't have right then the time or the energy to deal with some particular situation. So there was also a case where a student was deceptive because their job required it of them. This was a person in customer service. And she actually found it was almost impossible to go for any length of time without telling an untruth of some sort. I was like, okay, really learning something about our economy and certain jobs here. So part of that is because of the way our language and our social sort of interactions are actually structured culturally around less than fully truthful speech. So just to give a really innocuous example, she found that everybody would come in and she's there whatever at the checkout counter or something, and people would say, how are you doing? And she would always say good, even though she was not necessarily doing good at that time. I mean, she was working a pretty boring job. It's like hour 7. It's like she's enough already, but she has to give the same answer every time the situation requires this sort of thing. So she struggled. Well, is it just a cultural interaction, and the truth content of the words is actually not a part of the interaction, or am I making wrong speech in this? And so they're very good about reflecting on these things and realizing them. I did have one student who was caught in the worst possible trap that this exercise can possibly provoke, because his girlfriend asked, do I look good in this? And frankly, he lied, and I did not take any marks away because I thought, okay, you got a choice between this, breaking this precept or possibly causing someone to break the precept against violence towards you. So like, okay, just go ahead, whatever. more than one student actually was worried about how they lie to their dog. This came up in 2 separate papers this time. I was like, okay, all right, they're really worried about their dogs because when they go out, they always say to the dog, "Oh, I'll be back soon," you know, but actually they don't come back until later that day, you know. So they wondered, is this lying? So it's because the dog can't understand. So they thought about that a lot. Okay. So, you know, as you can see, the students actually take this really quite seriously, right? We might have stereotypes of, you know, young people and whatever we may think about them, but actually all these students are really thinking about these things. They're really rising to the challenge of these exercises and then discovering things and then having a deeper thought process that's provoked by this sort of thing. So, you know, I was pretty impressed with this. You know, some students even discovered that they lie to themselves fairly frequently. I thought that was something probably worth knowing, right? That was quite an insight to discover. There was a student who realized that because it's hard to know the truth about lots of things, many of his statements are probably less than truthful, even though he's doing his best, right? Just because we see all sorts of stuff on the news and we get all these conflicting ideas from our social media or wherever. And, you know, he may be saying a thing, that thing may not actually be factually correct. He might be inaccurate or he may be just flatly wrong, right? But he doesn't know that. So is he telling the truth or not? He had this whole reflection about this sort of thing. So I thought, oh, that was really good too. So all of this tells us that there's so many ways that we may be untruthful in a technical sense without being evil, being pathological liars, or, you know, it's just part of being ordinary foolish beings, actually, something that we discover through this sort of exercise. And right speech, this is an interesting matter from sort of a Buddhist philosophical standpoint, because right speech receives its own place in the Noble Eightfold Path. It's one of those 8 steps all by itself. This is separate from right action, which is another different step. So, and right action covers most of the other precepts. So you got like basically 4 things under one, and then one thing out of it all by itself, sort of called out in this particular way. In other words, it's so important and it's so challenging that it's separated out for special attention in Buddhism. And, you know, the students, they discovered that, you know, some of the precepts are broken because of our own sort of craving impulses. This may be ones around, you know, food or sex or intoxicants or something. But right speech is broken mainly because of social situations that we find it too difficult to handle without resorting to behaviors that Buddhism considers to be sometimes immoral or in other cases problematic or something like that, right? So there was something different about right speech that caused people to have to treat it differently than these other sorts of precepts and so on. So on the one hand, this suggests that we could avoid the wrong action of untruthfulness by taking ourselves out of those sort of situations where we just kind of end up having to do this or feeling we have to do this sort of thing. Or maybe we could do, you know, we could sort of mitigate it by cultivating relationships in which we can be fully honest or open. So that's one way of looking at it. But on the other hand, and that is a way that some forms of Buddhism do suggest, actually. But on the other hand, avoidance of such situations, this is nearly impossible for regular lay people, right? And breaking the precepts in this and some of the other ways, it's partly the result of living within systems that are far vaster than our single individual selves, right? And in which we have really quite limited power over what we can do, what we can say in any one of these situations. And so that kind of dilemma, I think it provokes some deeper thinking about the meaning and the limits of morality in an imperfect world, which is indeed the world that we find ourselves in. And that leads to a lot of good discussions in my class. The fact that, you know, if I put on the board, you know, Buddha says, tell the truth, then, you know, they just write it in their notebooks and then they hope that they get it right on a test somewhere. It doesn't do it. But if we do these sort of exercises, they really start thinking through, what does this mean? Are we even able to do this? And what enables us to do it? What prevents us from doing? What do we have power over, and what has power over us, no matter our best attempts? All the, like, really good discussions come out of this sort of thing. So I really appreciate that honesty that the students show in their papers and in their discussions. And this is one of those situations where, yeah, I'm the professor at the head of the class, but I end up learning a lot from them as well. And, you know, this, when I see things in their papers that I can recognize, it causes me to reflect. And then I discover how the Dharma operates in my own life as well. So I just thought these were really sort of interesting little insights we got from this exercise. And since I learned from them, I thought I would maybe pass some of the lessons on for us all here today. So thank you very much for your patience and listening to me about my students and their exercises. And that'll complete our Dharma talk for March. We could just put our hands together and gasho to close this. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda. Namanda. Namanda.